Here from Washington, D.C. on our last day of session before we're off for the weekend, and I wanted to report on a few things. One, on Monday, the Intelligence Committee is going to have Comey, the FBI director, come and testify about this crazy wiretap issue. And you know, I think what we're going to do, since it's going to be live, is we're going to take his testimony and I'll put it on my Facebook page so that you can see the entire hearing. Today, this morning, we had the Democratic caucus, and we met with Secretary Kelly, who is the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. We met with him about the immigration issue, and I want to tell you that it was a very tense meeting because members throughout the country are having the same issues that we're having in Los Angeles, with ICE agents coming in inappropriately to places, people being arrested in courtrooms, you know, outside of schools, etc. I raised with him the issue where he went on CNN and basically said that if parents come across the border with their kids, that he is considering a policy of putting the kids into foster care to essentially punish and deter parents from coming across the border with their kids. So you might know that we held a press conference, and about 80 members of Congress signed a letter for him to reconsider this policy. So I raised the issue with him. I wound up running into him in the hallway, so I followed him down the hallway and talked to him about the issue further, because I thought when I raised it in caucus, he didn't understand me. It was very clear that he didn't understand the foster care system. I told him, I said, the foster care system already doesn't have enough foster parents for the kids that need homes now. So how on earth would you be able to do that? And why would you do that? That is not a system that is supposed to be used to punish parents. It's a system that's supposed to be used to protect children from the abuse and neglect. So he didn't seem to know much about the system. We're going to keep the pressure on, because I think it's one of the most inhumane things I've ever heard of, that what we're essentially going to do is take kids away from parents to prevent them or to punish them for bringing their kids across the border. So you know that the president released his budget, and it's a really shocking budget. But you know, one thing about a budget is a statement of your values. And he has certainly told us where his values are. You know, he's proposing to eliminate over 19 departments, one of which will really hit Los Angeles hard, the community development block grants. You know, in LA, we just finished passing the two measures to address the homelessness situation, Measure H and Measure HHH, the city and the county. Well, if the community block grants are cut out, that's really going to undermine our ability to implement the ballot measures that we just passed. So that's going to be terrible. He's talking about eliminating the National Endowment of the Arts, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, so there goes Sesame Street, the National Endowment for Humanities, the Institute for Peace. I think it's a real statement of his values. Now, the good news is that when the president introduces a budget, Congress essentially throws it out the window. But it is important because he's putting it down as a marker to let us know where he's coming from. So he wants to increase the defense budget by $50-some billion. So if he's going to do that, he has to cut. And so, of course, he's cutting from programs that are really, really critical. Meals on Wheels? How could you cut Meals on Wheels? He wants to cut the lunch program or breakfast program for kids. He wants to change funding in education so that there's more money for charter schools and essentially vouchers for private schools. So Congress now will consider the budget. It will take us many, many months before we're actually finished with it. But I will say that there was a huge objection from almost everybody, Democrats and Republicans, on some of the cuts. By the way, of course, the other thing he wants the money for is his crazy wall. And I will say that part of the good news about his wall is that a lot of the Republicans are objecting to it as well. One, because who knows how much it's going to cost, but he's asking for billions of dollars for his wall. So the other issue I wanted to raise with you is the Affordable Care Act. And the Affordable Care Act, and I think it's really important that we call the replacement Trump Care. That's really important because, one, he doesn't want us to call it Trump Care, so that's the reason we want to call it Trump Care. He doesn't want it called that because he doesn't want to own it. So, you know, he puts his name on everything. So if he's reluctant to put his name on something, I think that's an important pressure point for all of us to remember. He's trying to distance himself from it. So I did get a number of questions from people. And by the way, if you want to ask me a question, once we're finished with Facebook Live, I could take your questions. I'm here in my office in Washington. I'll be here for the next few hours. Feel free to call me at area code 202-225-7084. That's my office number, area code 202-225-7084. You can also send an email to our press secretary, whose name is Zachary Shadell. Did I pronounce your name right? He's on the other side of this camera. And his email is ZACHARY dot S as in Sam, EIDL at mail.house.gov. So I'm going to repeat that one more time. ZACHARY dot SEIDL at mail.house.gov. Several of you have already asked me questions. Miriam from Palms asked me if the bill will pass the House, and now I'm talking about the Affordable Care Act and Trump Care. You know what? I don't know. Right now, the way it is, the split in the Republicans is such that if they had to take the vote today, it would not pass the House. But that doesn't mean that within a week it might pass the House. So I think it's very important that we voice our concerns about this. Nancy from Sawtell is wondering, what am I doing to oppose this bill? I'm talking to you right now. I'm going to do everything I can to oppose this bill. But you know what? I can't do it alone, so I need your help. And I do hope that you make your voices heard. You can certainly call the leadership of the House. You know, Speaker Ryan needs to know that you're opposed. Barbara from West LA wants to know if the cost of health insurance will increase to cover those who opt not to have health care insurance, and also if there will be a hidden tax. Well, basically, the way their plan is laid out is that if you're on health care and for whatever reason you go off for like 3 months, there's a time period, then you have to pay this huge penalty. So even though they say there's not an individual mandate, they do find a way for giving the insurance companies essentially a bonus for you being off. And remember now, when they're talking about the tax breaks, the way they are essentially going to cut off from 18 to 24 million people is they're taking the money out of the system, because the way the Affordable Care Act was set up, there was a tax that was placed on high-income folks. So if you happen to earn over $250,000, you are going to have your tax cut. Miriam writes that access to health care is not health care. Absolutely. If you want to know what I feel that health care is an absolute right. I think our health care system should be like public education. Who thinks about public education? I mean, you know that that is a right. In our country, from kindergarten to 12th grade, it is a right. You are guaranteed public education. Now, we can debate the quality of it all day long, but it's guaranteed. And I think that healthcare should be as well. And I know that everybody watching knows that the United States is the only developed country that does not guarantee healthcare. So what is the, Camille from Mar Vista wants to know the best way to resist the repeal of the ACA. As my constituent, you know, you really need to voice your concerns to leadership. And then, you know, there's a lot of Republicans in California. You know, I can't tell you to lobby different members of the House, but, you know, you might want to know how members outside of our district are voting. And why don't you look up their voting record? Look up who are the Republicans in California, and why don't you find out how they're voting? One thing I can guarantee you, that every Democrat in the state of California will be voting against repealing the Affordable Care Act. That I know for a fact. Now, I don't know how all of my Republican colleagues are going to vote, but you might want to find that out. A few things that the Republicans are doing that I think is incredibly disingenuous is that they are saying, number one, that the Affordable Care Act is collapsing. The Affordable Care Act is not collapsing, and we have the proud distinction of saying in California it is extremely successful, and we've even moved it further along than they have in other states because we're fortunate to have a state where everybody is on board. All of the leadership in Sacramento and in our various counties are supporting the bill, are supporting the Affordable Care Act, and doing everything they can to make sure that we all have access. Another thing that the Republicans are saying that is incredibly disingenuous is that everybody will have access to health care. Access is a really key word. I mean, I have access to a private jet plane, but I can't afford it. So what difference does that make? Having access is not the same thing as having health care. And we need to be very, very clear about that and not be confused about that. Annie asked, can our California legislature refrain from sending the federal tax dollars to D.C.? No, I don't think so. I know that people have said things like that, but I definitely don't think that there is a way to do that. But you know what? We do get cheated, though. For every dollar that California sends to Washington, we only get 76 cents back. But in a lot of states, like some of the southern states, for example, that deny their population health care, for every dollar they send to Washington, D.C., they get $1.25 back. So those are some of the things that are going on in D.C. We do anticipate voting on the floor the end of next week. So stay tuned. And like I said, find out where the Californians, Republicans, how they are going to vote on the bill. If you have a question for me, feel free to call me in my office. I'm at 202-225-7084. It's 1:45 here in Washington, D.C. I'll be here until at least 5 o'clock. I look forward to hearing from you, and we'll talk again. I'll keep you posted on events next week.